Hello, my name is Kevin Boyle. I am the author of Hit It With a Bigger Hammer. In my last video, I talked about how and why the prevention solution in my book came about in Carter's, a subsidiary of Carter Holt Harvey Limited. We had resolved the first part of the company's criteria to keep the branch open by including the employees in the investigation process. We now had to resolve the second part, to develop a prevention solution that was credible and acceptable to all other employees so that it might be adopted in all 45 Carter's branches throughout New Zealand. We now had 4 weeks to come up with a solution that would include everyone in its process and somehow overcome the code of silence surrounding offending that unfairly protected the offenders. I convened a meeting with all employees of the branch to debrief the investigation and to start the process of finding an acceptable solution going forward. We began with the knowledge that the Code of Silence covenant would not be easily overcome, and in the event, it would not be cynically agreed to simply to reverse the company's decision to close the branch. Such an agreement could not be conferred upon others who would not agree, and therefore it would not meet the company's criteria that it had to be acceptable to everyone. We began a discussion about security management in commerce and how it excluded the employees from its management, in the same way policing did in wider society. They agreed it appeared to polarize the employees as opposed to gaining their trust and cooperation. They also agreed it was considered by many employees to be invasive and that it engendered a them versus us environment. I confirmed that this was the conclusion of all employees I had previously interviewed when researching an alternative solution. I told them all the employees researched had agreed that theft and fraud could be better managed by including them because they worked alongside the offenders and had all the knowledge of the offending. But they also agreed that it was none of their business, that if the offenders were caught, it was their problem. No one wanted to narc or inform, not only because of the societal stigma attached, but because of the punitive consequence it brought down on the offenders and the possible retaliation that might result. I told them my research concluded this exact position and that the Code of Silence protecting the offenders prevailed and could not be overcome. However, I told them that this case had now proved that it was their business and that it did concern them. They were the victims of the offending, as well as the company. I told them that this was true of all offending. Everyone is a victim of offending to varying degrees in one form or another, no matter what the offending is. I told them a good place to start might be to replace enforcement. The principal role of security management was prevention as a first option. This would allow intervention under the banner of prevention rather than punitive consequence under enforcement. I explained a warning or a tap on the shoulder as opposed to job loss and prosecution was what was preferred. I told them the company could accept that someone be warned against offending, providing the offending stopped. They agreed this would be a good starting point, but it did not overcome the fact that a warning might also be seen to be interfering in someone else's business, and thereby the Code of Silence still prevailed. I suggested, if we all agreed that this was going to be the new process, that this would overcome interfering. To demonstrate, I wrote on the whiteboard, I agree with the company's rules around serious misconduct pertaining to theft and the unlawful removal of company property, and I understand that breaching these rules could put others' employment at risk. I agree not to breach these rules, and if I do, I agree that I can be warned by a peer or workmate or anyone who has knowledge of such a breach. Changing the emphasis from enforcement to prevention would allow for agreed intervention. I suggested that no one could object to this because at the time of the agreement, no one would anticipate later offending, and the agreement would thereby act as an enduring deterrent. And those already offending could not object to such an agreement for fear of attracting undue attention. And in the event, it would put them on notice to stop their offending. It appeared to be an holistic solution that could be universally agreed to and applied. However, two further points were raised. Firstly, the agreement did not guarantee that those with knowledge of offending would necessarily intervene. And secondly, it did not guarantee the warning would be heeded by the offending party. I suggested the agreement could be extended to address these two concerns, and I wrote on the whiteboard, if I have knowledge of a breach of the rules, I agree to warn the offending party. If I have offended and received such a warning, I agree to heed the warning and stop further offending. It was agreed that these were reasonable inclusions given the nature and intent of the prevention objective. However, one further obstacle was overriding, and it threatened to derail the process thus far. Someone asked, what if the offender disregarded all attempts at intervention and ignored the warnings and continued to offend? It was a question that brought everyone back to the code of silence. After coming this far, it threatened to scuttle the progress to date, as continued offending meant the only option left was to officially report the offending, and the code of silence still prevailed. I now knew the answer, but I said nothing. I knew they would also come to it by understanding what they had already achieved. They did not want to be beaten. Finally, one of them said, what if we all agreed that we can be reported to management if we continued to offend? It was the eureka moment that everyone recognized and burst into spontaneous applause. I wrote on the whiteboard, if I am warned by others and I fail to heed the warning, I agree that my offending can be formally reported to management. It simply worked. No one who agreed to accept the warning and continued to offend after agreeing to heed the warning could complain after also agreeing that the offending could be formally reported to management. The offender could no longer invoke the code of silence around his offending and would have no cause for retaliation if the offending was formally reported. The full agreement was as follows. I agree with the company's rules around serious misconduct pertaining to theft and unlawful removal of company property, and I understand that breaching these rules could put others' employment at risk. I agree not to breach these rules, and if I do, I agree that I can be warned by a peer or workmate or anyone who has knowledge of such a breach. If I have knowledge of a breach of these rules, I agree to warn the offending party. If I have offended and received such a warning, I agree to heed the warning and stop further offending. If I breach the rules and am warned by others and I fail to heed the warning, I agree that my offending can be formally reported to management. The agreement introduced a simple intervention process and management structure prior to the need to report offending. It was an agreement that removed all of the obstacles surrounding the code of silence, and it was an agreement that was acceptable to all. The branch employees agreed unanimously to adopt this prevention solution and presented it to Mrs. Bentham Inoki, who immediately saw its potential to be acceptable to everyone in the company. They reversed their decision to close the branch, which returned to profitability, and soon afterwards became the star-performing branch in the company. The solution was adopted by all other branches. Twice its introduction was received with standing ovations by the employees. It was emotive approval that confirmed the frustration everyone felt about the code of silence, and the relief at how this solution could overcome it. Everyone was comfortable participating in the solution, where previously issues were unattended to and may have manifested in major loss. It successfully intervened in all manner of offending over the next 5 years in the company, including successfully dealing with some peripheral customer issues that were unexpected bonuses for the solution. I will share some of these with you in my next video. I'll see you then.